talking about DNA. Alright, and then the whole second segment we did, I'll put my voice, crime scene.
Okay.
Alright, now we'll do the last one. And we're back here on the Michigan Crusaders. I am Mike Kilbreth, and joining me in this closing segment, we're going to go back to our forensic scientist guy who, let's put your other hat on, because a lot of good old-fashioned investigator work, good detective work from Michigan, 1,000 miles away, did something that the Boulder Police Department couldn't do with $2 million put into their case. Yeah, I don't think Boulder, Colorado wanted to solve this case. Tell me your views on this.
A neighbor that had a major breakthrough tip on one of the 4 persons of interest. She called the tip line, and they got an excellent tip line. Everybody involved there is the greatest people. Boulder people are great people. But she had to call it 90 times over 3 months, 5 times a week, business hours only, 90 times to 3 months to try to turn in a major tip. The kind officer that was doing the interview, within a few minutes, says, "Thank you for calling in the tip, the best lady you could ever talk to," and said, "Thank you, but your tip probably will never be used because the guy wants attention," and it never went anywhere.
Roscoe, when we talk about tips, when you got all the attention with the National Enquirer, the Facebook page, the John Bonet investigations, another neighbor called and told you that she told the Boulder police about suspects running from the home. Tell us about that. Ignored by the Boulder police, which led to finding out maybe who the persons of interest really are in this case, because your persons of interest, they're not on the list of 22 suspects compiled by the Boulder Police Department.
On our online Facebook page, we call John Bonet Investigations. It's a non-law enforcement Facebook page, but we are doing the research and we post a lot of the evidence and a lot of the profiling there. Several neighbors have called me up, through different ways of communications, and said that their tips, that were very important tips, and became, as we researched it, very credible, and said it wasn't responded to. Some of them wouldn't take the reports. Others did thank you for turning in the tip, and that was the end of that. Nothing developed from it.
Now Derek, who is from Minnesota, another guy 1,000 miles away, ran down some of the information on these people, the documents, you call it your document lab, of developing motive, that these people had money problems. But you came up with this list, and it's a matter of going after the people on the list. But let's talk about how you came to compile this list. The beginning was right in the neighborhood. We're not going to identify where, but there was a guy who was living in the basement of a neighbor that had a relationship with John Bonet Ramsey and her brother as babysitters. He lived in their basement of these babysitters.
That's correct.
This gentleman, this was his place of operation, so to speak. Talk to us about how you came to focus on this gentleman in the neighborhood. And we're not going to name him, even though he has passed away. And I might mention there was a shrine to young John Bonet Ramsey in his house that burned down. It's unbelievable that this thing has been under the radar despite all of this evidence that's out there. National Enquirer, they named him. We're not going to name him here because I don't want to fight lawsuits, but talk about how you got to that point with this particular suspect.
Well, there's several ways we ended up doing that. For the first 6 years out of the 12, I went in circles. I went in circles because there's so much deliberate and accidental misinformation on the case. It appears to me that this case doesn't want to be solved by officials in that state that may control this case. And there's a lot of suggested evidence that's why it's a cold case for 24 years. The person we're talking about had major financial difficulties just before this murder. Estimates that were tracked on documents, over $70,000 in judgments, which you can't get out of. So the organizer, we'll call him, needed money. He had all the inside information about the Ramseys, where their travels. Matter of fact, to do this crime, you could not perform it inside the Ramseys' house with their watchdog in there, John Bonet's dog. That dog barked at everything, we're told. Well, the watchdog, because the Ramseys was going on a 10-day vacation, was babysitted or dog cared at his location where he lived in the basement. So it gave him an opportunity to perform a crime with 3 other individuals. We have 4 people identified to perform this case, and it took all 4 to do so. We have a transportation person that was up on the hill monitoring the street. Very impressive. He actually confessed twice, and that information was sent to Boulder, but nothing happened.
And this gentleman, he's had problems with the law. He actually has lived in the Flint Township area where you live. He now lives outside of Genesee County, but in a neighboring county, if you will. At the time, he lived in Charlevoix, where the Ramsey vacation trip. They were going to Charlevoix, where this guy also lived. He didn't like Mr. Ramsey. He was a very wealthy businessman. He had real anger for this guy, and he had money problems.
He said he hates John Ramsey. He hates Lockheed Martin. Wouldn't say why, but he had major connections in the Charlevoix area, relatives that were in high official positions there, and was going under financial failures. That's why his family relatives been there since the 50s.
And we had relatives of his who lived right in the neighborhood where the Ramseys lived in Colorado.
Yes, we're told that he has relatives. Denver's within 20 minutes, so between Boulder and Denver, so it's right in close in that vicinity. Relatives.
We have to go back. This crime, why did the police focus on John Ramsey and his wife Patsy?
It doesn't make sense. Forensically, there's not one item of evidence that connects any Ramsey member family to this crime, including DNA.
When the Ramseys were the focus of the investigation, one thing that stood out was the fact there were no footprints in the snow. Talk about the footprints in the snow and that theory, which you kind of came up with, the fact that there are no footprints because the perpetrators were in the house. They were inside the house. Talk about that.
At 5:52, Patsy Ramsey called on the kitchen wall phone. That's a phone that can't stay unhooked. The engineers that designed that phone so it can never, ever be unhooked. The basement phone in the laundry room where the 2 intruders were monitoring, that had duct tape over the handset, I believe an operator said after Patsy hung up the phone, they heard muffled voices, and they tried to blame the Ramseys and the son covering up the crime.
The son Burke.
The son Burke, where the intruders were in the basement with John Bonet. And the basement phone would have been most likely used as a monitoring device. The muffled voices the operator swears she heard would be because of the black tape. And that black tape was then put on John Bonet's mouth after she was strangled and carried to the wine cellar, so body fluids wouldn't transfer to them because of the way the crime was dealt with.
John Bonet Ramsey, your theory was she was in the house all along. How did they get her to the basement? Let's go back to the beginning. When did they get into the house?
Witnesses and neighbors said right after the Ramseys left for a dinner. This is a Christmas dinner at the Whites. It's about a mile away. At about 4:54 and around 5 o'clock, 1996, there, just the day of Christmas, the sun set right around 5 o'clock. So it was right at dusk. That created the cover, the darkness, for one of the intruders that is connected to the neighbors of the Ramseys to come down the street. Neighbors next to the Ramseys witnessed and identified who the first intruder was that was entering the property
And we know for a fact that they gave this information to the Boulder police.
Correct, and it didn't seem to get responded. What happened, and this is common, and a lot of the police officers that aren't part of that group, other investigators says, and they were warned, officers in Boulder Police, if it doesn't point to the Ramseys, we're not going to be interested. And if they continued to follow leads that were not the Ramseys, they were taken off the case or eliminated. So the upper command was focused on the Ramseys, and that's what they went after. They spent $2 million. There's 60,000 pages in their crime files. It would take years if you read 20 pages a day, 5 days a week, one time. It would be about 12 and a half years just to read the case file once.
I have to defend the Boulder, Colorado officials because they're probably going to get sued if you solve this case because, as you just said, they were zeroing in on the Ramseys, John Ramsey and his wife Patsy. So when it comes out that they are cleared completely, even though the DA cleared them, the subsequent clearing when they admitted there was DNA evidence that showed that it was somebody else that was in that house.
Mary Lacey, the district attorney, went against all odds. If you lived in Boulder, the way the media had it in the investigation, the umbrella of suspicion, under a suspicion, the Ramseys was the fall guys.
The Ramseys, you said 12 years ago, you didn't believe they did it.
No.
Now, you told me about your first meeting with John Ramsey. You had a book signing. You met John Ramsey because they had a problem with their camera. You've been a video guy for many years. You helped solve some problems, got to know him. And one thing that struck you, he said that he was never a religious man until after this incident with John Bonet. And going through thousands of crime scene photos, you noticed a Bible that was open on his desk. Talk about that Bible and the significance of that Bible to this case.
Well, John was traveling for his computer business all over the world. And he didn't have a lot of time to sit and read the Bible at that moment. A Bible was opened up to the Psalms 35, which kind of says, I'm going to start over. Hit that for a second.
Okay,
Go.
Ready? Yeah. So Roscoe, what significance does that Bible have?
Well, the Bible, John Ramsey said in the testimony that he did not open that Bible. It was stored, it was a gift given to him, and it was stored in a bookshelf in the master suite. Somebody opened up that Bible and opened it up to Psalms 35, which the passage is about being not guilty of a crime that he's charged with, which totally relates to the organizer because of the government judgments that he felt he wasn't responsible for, and it made him kind of a homeless person. The Bible on Patsy Ramsey's desk that was found was Psalms 118, which happens to have a similar connection to the ransom money, 118,000, Psalms 118. So the organizer is the type of person to show how smart he is, to leave a lot of clues in the house that would relate to who they are, but since they're so smart, the police couldn't figure it out, and that was kind of like a game that they did. And that even includes hidden messages in the ransom note.
Roscoe, let's talk about the ransom note. 3 pages long. It was written inside the house. Tell us about the ransom note.
Well, it was written inside a house, but not the Ramsey's house. A lot of people got that wrong. On the 23rd, the